The morning sun shone on the tall iron gates of the royal palace. James Porter stood with 20 other young men and women. They all wore the same black pants and white shirts. They all had the same short haircuts, but each had their own story. James was 23 years old. He had just finished his army training. Now he was here for his big dream, to join the Royal Guard. "Stand straight, eyes forward," Captain Reynolds shouted as he walked down the line. James's heart beat fast. His grandfather, William Porter, had been a Royal Guard for 30 years. As a boy, James had listened to his grandfather's stories about guarding the Queen, standing for hours without moving, and marching in perfect steps during big events. Now James wanted to be part of that world too. Captain Reynolds stopped in front of James. He was a tall man with gray hair and hard eyes that seemed to see everything. "Porter," Captain Reynolds said, looking at his list. "Your grandfather was William Porter, wasn't he?" "Yes, sir," James answered, surprised the captain knew. "He was one of the best guards we ever had," Captain Reynolds said. "Big shoes to fill, son." James saw something he didn't expect, a small, kind smile on the captain's face. Maybe this world of strict rules had room for kindness too. The first day was hard. They practiced standing still for hours. They learned how to march with perfect steps. They memorized all the rules of the palace. A royal guard is not just a person in a fancy red coat, Sergeant Miller told them. You are part of history. You are the face of the nation. After a long day, James sat alone in the guardhouse. His feet hurt. His back was stiff. He wondered if he had made a mistake. An older guard named Thomas sat next to him. "First day is always the hardest," Thomas said with a friendly smile. "I almost quit on my first day." "Really?" James asked. "What made you stay?" Thomas pointed to the palace walls outside the window. "The first time I stood guard during a big event, I saw a little boy looking at me like I was a hero. That's when I knew this job matters." That night, James called his mother. "How was your first day?" she asked. "Hard," James said honestly, "but good." "Your grandfather would be so proud," his mother said. "He always believed you would follow his path." As James got ready for bed, he took out an old photo from his bag. It showed his grandfather in his Royal Guard uniform, standing tall and proud. James had carried this picture since he was 12 years old. The next morning came early. At sunrise, James and the other new guards lined up again. This time, they were each given a red practice jacket, not the real uniform, but a step closer. "Today we learn about protection," Captain Reynolds announced. "The Royal Guard is not just for show. We protect the royal family, the palace, and everyone who visits." As James put on the red jacket, he felt different. This wasn't just about following his grandfather anymore. This was about becoming part of something important, a tradition hundreds of years old. "Porter," Captain Reynolds called, "you're with me today." As James followed the captain toward the palace, he saw tourists already gathering at the gates, taking pictures. A little girl waved at him. Without thinking, James smiled slightly and nodded. Captain Reynolds saw this and stopped. James worried he had made a mistake. Instead, the captain said quietly, "The best guards remember they're human first, Porter. Just don't let the tourists see you smile during duty hours." James nodded. "Yes, sir." He was beginning to understand. The Royal Guard was about tradition and rules, but behind every perfect uniform beat a human heart. 3 months had passed since James joined the Royal Guard. Every morning, he woke up at 5:00 a.m. Every day, he trained for hours. He learned to stand still for 2 hours without moving. He learned to march in perfect steps. He learned all the rules of the palace. Today was different. Today was James's first real duty as a Royal Guard. "Remember," Sergeant Miller told the new guards, "do not smile. Do not talk. Do not move. You are not people today. You are the Royal Guard." James put on his red uniform coat and tall black hat for the first time. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. The person looking back seemed older, stronger, and part of history. "Ready, Porter?" Thomas asked. Thomas had become James's friend during training. He had been a guard for 2 years already. "I think so," James said, feeling his heart beat fast. "Just remember to breathe," Thomas said with a smile. "And don't lock your knees. New guards sometimes faint if they lock their knees." At 10 a.m., James took his position outside the palace gates. Hundreds of tourists were already there, taking pictures and pointing. James stood perfectly still, looking straight ahead. His face showed nothing. A small boy walked up to James. "Hello, Mr. Guard," the boy said. "Can you move? Are you a robot?" James didn't answer. He didn't smile. He didn't even look at the boy. "He's not allowed to move," the boy's father explained. "It's his job to stand still." Inside, James wanted to smile at the boy, but he remembered his training. He kept his face serious and his body still. The hours passed slowly. James's feet began to hurt. His back ached. The sun was hot in the summer sky. Sweat ran down his back under the heavy red coat. Still, he did not move. Then something happened that no one expected. Dark clouds filled the sky. Suddenly, rain poured down. The tourists ran for cover, but James stayed at his post. Rain soaked his uniform. Water dripped from his hat. But he stood tall and still. From the corner of his eye, James saw Captain Reynolds watching from a window. The captain nodded slightly, approving of James's dedication. After 2 hours, it was time for the changing of the guard. This was the famous ceremony where new guards replaced the ones on duty. James had practiced this hundreds of times during training. The royal band began to play. James and the other guards marched in perfect steps. Tourists pushed forward to watch, their cameras flashing. James focused on each movement, each turn, each step. Everything had to be perfect. Then James saw a face in the crowd that made his heart jump. His mother was there, watching proudly. She had traveled 3 hours to see his first day on duty. James wanted to smile or wave, but he kept his face serious. This was his duty now. After the ceremony, James was back in the guardhouse. His uniform was still wet from the rain. His legs hurt from standing so long. But he felt proud. "Well done, Porter," Captain Reynolds said, walking into the room. "You handled yourself well out there today." "Thank you, sir," James replied. "Your grandfather would be proud," the captain added. "He once stood guard during the worst storm in 20 years. Never moved an inch." Later that evening, James met his mother for dinner. "You looked so handsome in your uniform," she said, her eyes shining. "Your grandfather's photo doesn't do the uniform justice." "It was harder than I thought," James admitted. "Standing still for that long, not reacting to anything." "Did you see me in the crowd?" his mother asked. "Yes," James said with a smile. "That was the hardest part, not smiling when I saw you." That night, as James got ready for bed, Thomas asked him, "So, how was your first day as a real royal guard?" James thought about the long hours, the rain, the aching feet, and the proud look on his mother's face. "It was just the beginning," he answered, "but I think I'm where I belong." Outside the window, the palace stood strong and grand against the night sky. James Porter was now part of its story, part of its tradition. Behind his serious guard face was a beating heart, proud to serve. 6 months had passed since James joined the Royal Guard. Winter had come to the palace. The trees were bare and the air was cold. Most tourists stayed home during these cold months, making the palace quieter than usual. Today, James had a new duty. He was assigned to guard the inside of the palace for the first time. This was a special honor for new guards. "Remember, Porter," Sergeant Miller told him, "inside the palace, you might see the royal family. If they speak to you, you may answer, but keep it short. Always call them Your Majesty or Your Highness." James nodded, feeling nervous but excited. The inside of the palace was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Gold decorations covered the walls. Paintings from hundreds of years ago hung in heavy frames. Soft red carpets covered the floors. James was stationed outside the library door. He stood tall and still, just as he had learned. The hallway was quiet. Sometimes a palace worker would walk by, but most just nodded at James and continued on their way. After 2 hours of standing guard, James heard voices coming from inside the library. The door opened, and James's heart nearly stopped. The Queen herself walked out, followed by 2 assistants. James stood even straighter, looking directly ahead as he had been taught. But to his surprise, the Queen stopped in front of him. "Good morning," she said with a kind smile. "Good morning, Your Majesty," James replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're new to the inside guard, aren't you?" the Queen asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. This is my first week of inside duty." The Queen studied him for a moment. "What is your name?" "Porter, Your Majesty." "James Porter." "Porter," the Queen repeated. "Was your grandfather William Porter, by any chance?" James couldn't hide his surprise. "Yes, Your Majesty, he was." The Queen smiled. "I remember him well. He served for many years. He once told me he had a grandson who might follow in his footsteps one day. That must be you." "Yes, Your Majesty," James said, feeling a lump in his throat. He never knew his grandfather had spoken to the Queen about him. "He was a fine guard," the Queen continued. "He served during some difficult times. There was one day, during a big storm, when part of the palace roof was damaged. Your grandfather helped move all the paintings from that room to safety. He saved some very important pieces of history that day." James had never heard this story before. His chest filled with pride. "Thank you for telling me, Your Majesty," he said. "My grandfather passed away 3 years ago. I'm learning new things about him even now." The Queen nodded. "The Royal Guard is more than just ceremony, young man. It's about protecting our history and our future. Your grandfather understood that." As the Queen prepared to walk away, she added, "I hope you're finding your place here, Porter." "I am, Your Majesty," James answered honestly. After the Queen left, James remained at his post, but he felt different inside. His grandfather had not just been a guard in a red coat. He had been important. He had made a difference. Later that day, when his shift ended, James called his mother. "Did you know grandfather once saved paintings during a storm at the palace?" he asked. "Yes," his mother said. "He never liked to talk about it much. He always said he was just doing his job." The Queen remembered him, James said. She even remembered that he had a grandson who might become a guard someday. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," his mother said softly. That night, as snow fell outside the guardhouse window, James wrote in his journal. He wrote about meeting the Queen. He wrote about learning more about his grandfather. Most importantly, he wrote about understanding that being a royal guard was about more than just standing still and looking important. The Royal Guard was about being part of something bigger. It was about protecting history. It was about serving with honor. And sometimes, it was about saving paintings during a storm. James Porter was beginning to understand the heart behind the tradition. 1 year had passed since James joined the Royal Guard. Spring had returned to the palace. Flowers bloomed in the royal gardens, and tourists came back in large numbers. James no longer felt like a new guard. He knew the rules and traditions by heart now. He could stand for hours without moving. He could march in perfect steps with his eyes closed. But the most important thing he had learned was about the people behind the uniforms. After a long day of duty, James sat in the guardhouse with his fellow guards. This was his favorite time of day. When they were away from the public, they could be themselves again, just normal men and women. "My daughter took her first steps yesterday," Michael said, showing pictures on his phone. Michael was one of the oldest guards, with 15 years of service. "I almost missed it because of the special ceremony." "But you didn't miss it," Thomas reminded him. Captain Reynolds changed the schedule so you could go home early. James watched as the other guards gathered around to see Michael's pictures. This was the side of the Royal Guard that tourists never saw. Behind the serious faces and perfect uniforms were real people with families, dreams, and stories. "Porter, tell them about your grandfather and the paintings," Sergeant Miller said, sitting beside James. James smiled. Since meeting the Queen, his story about his grandfather saving the paintings had become famous among the guards. The Queen said he helped save important paintings during a big storm, James explained to some of the newer guards. "But my mother told me more. He stayed at the palace for 3 days during that storm, sleeping only a few hours each night. He helped move more than 50 paintings and old books to safety." "That's what being the guard is really about," Sergeant Miller said. "Not just looking good for the tourists, but being ready when you're really needed." The room grew quiet as an older guard named William stood up. William rarely spoke about his time as a guard, but when he did, everyone listened. "I was there during the fire of 2008, William said. "It was small, just in one room of the West Wing. But there were important guests staying at the palace. We had 5 minutes to get everyone out safely." The younger guards leaned forward, eager to hear the story. "We worked together like we had practiced it 100 times, William continued. "No panic, no confusion. We got every guest out, and no one even knew there was a fire until they were safely outside. That's when I understood what all our training was for." James thought about his own training. The long hours of practice, the strict rules, the perfect marching. It all had a purpose beyond looking good for tourists. Later that evening, as the guards prepared for bed, Captain Reynolds entered the guardhouse. This was unusual. The captain rarely visited in the evening. "Tomorrow is an important day," Captain Reynolds announced. "The palace will host leaders from 5 countries. Security will be tight. I need our best guards on duty." He looked around the room, then said, "Porter, Thomas, Michael, and Sarah, you 4 will be part of the special detail inside the palace." James felt his heart beat faster. This was a big responsibility. Inside guard duty during an important meeting was usually given to guards with many years of experience. "Thank you, sir," James said, surprised. After the captain left, Thomas patted James on the back. "Looks like you're one of us now, Porter. No longer the new kid." That night, James couldn't sleep. He thought about how much had changed in 1 year. He had gone from a nervous new recruit to a trusted member of the special detail. He thought about his grandfather, about the Queen's words, about William's story of the fire. The Royal Guard was not just about tradition. It was about trust. These people trusted each other with their lives, with the safety of the royal family, with the protection of history itself. As James finally drifted off to sleep, he realized he had found more than a job. He had found a second family, brothers and sisters in red coats, united by duty and trust. Winter came again to the palace. Snow covered the gardens, and Christmas lights shone from every window. For most people, Christmas was a time for family. But for the Royal Guard, duty came first. "We need guards on Christmas Day," Captain Reynolds announced one cold morning. "I know it's hard to be away from your families, but the palace needs protection even on holidays." Many guards looked down at their feet. No one wanted to miss Christmas with their families. James thought about his mother's famous Christmas dinner and the traditions they had shared every year. "I'll do it," James said, standing up. "I can take the Christmas Day shift." Captain Reynolds looked surprised. "Thank you, Porter, but we need at least 4 guards." Thomas stood up next. "I'll do it too." Then Michael stood. "Count me in." One by one, 12 guards volunteered. Some were younger guards like James. Others were older guards with children at home. "Why did you volunteer?" Thomas asked James later. "Don't you want to be with your family?" "My mother understands duty," James said. "My grandfather worked many Christmases. It's part of being the guard." On Christmas morning, James woke up early in the guardhouse. Outside, the palace grounds were quiet and beautiful under fresh snow. Most of the staff had the day off. Only the most essential workers were there. James put on his red coat and tall black hat. Even on Christmas, the uniform had to be perfect. As he prepared for duty, he found a small package on his bed with his name on it. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf and a note from his mother. "Stay warm while you protect the palace. Proud of you. Love, Mom." James smiled and tucked the scarf into his pocket. He couldn't wear it during duty, but having it close made him feel better. At his post inside the palace, James stood tall and still. The grand hallway was quiet. Through the windows, he could see families walking in the snow outside the palace gates, taking pictures and enjoying their Christmas day. Hours passed slowly. James thought about his mother at home, probably cooking the Christmas dinner he was missing. He thought about his cousins opening presents without him. For the first time since joining the Guard, James felt truly lonely. Then something unexpected happened. The door at the end of the hallway opened, and the Queen herself appeared. She was not in formal clothes, but wore a simple dress. She was carrying something in her hands. "Guard Porter," she said with a smile. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Your Majesty," James replied, surprised to see her. "I wanted to thank you and the other guards personally for your service today," the Queen said. She handed him a small box wrapped in royal blue paper. "This is for all of you on duty." "Thank you, Your Majesty," James said, not sure if he should accept the gift while on duty. "Please, open it," the Queen encouraged him. James carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a beautiful ornament with the royal seal and the words, "With gratitude, Christmas 2023. Every guard on Christmas duty receives one," the Queen explained. "It's a tradition my father started during the war, when guards had to stay at the palace through bombing raids." James didn't know what to say. He had not expected this personal touch from the Queen. "My grandfather had one of these," James said suddenly, remembering the old ornament that always hung on his mother's Christmas tree. "I never knew where it came from." "Then this continues a family tradition," the Queen said with a warm smile. "Please thank all the guards for me. The palace chef has prepared a special Christmas dinner for you all during your break time." After the Queen left, James held the ornament carefully. This small gift meant more to him than any present he might have received at home. It was a reminder that his service mattered, that the tradition he was part of had deep meaning. Later, when the guards gathered for their Christmas dinner in the staff dining room, James showed the others his mother's note and the scarf she had made. "Family traditions and guard traditions," Thomas said, raising his glass of cider. "Both are important." "To traditions," the guards said together, lifting their glasses. As snow fell softly outside the windows, James realized that while he missed his family, he was not alone. The Royal Guard was its own kind of family, with its own special traditions. Spring brought a special day to the palace. Leaders from many countries were coming for an important meeting. Flags from different nations flew along the palace gates. Newspeople set up cameras. Police checked everyone who came near. James and 5 other guards were assigned to the east entrance, where most guests would arrive. Captain Reynolds gave them special instructions that morning. "Today is not just about looking good," he said firmly. "Today is about real security. Keep your eyes open for anything unusual." James stood at his post, looking straight ahead as always. But his eyes moved constantly, watching the crowds, studying every person who came close to the barriers. The morning went smoothly. Important people arrived in big black cars. The guards checked their papers, then let them enter the palace. Everything followed the careful plan. Then, just after noon, James noticed something strange. A man in a dark coat was walking back and forth near the barriers. He kept putting his hand in his pocket, then taking it out again. His face looked nervous. James remembered his training. This was exactly the kind of behavior they were told to watch for. Carefully, without moving his head, James looked at Thomas, who was standing at the next post. Thomas had seen the man too. Using the small radio hidden in his uniform, James spoke very quietly. Possible concern at East Barrier. Man in dark coat. Watching him, came the answer from security. The man moved closer to the barrier. Now he was opening his bag. James's heart beat faster. Should he move? Should he stay at his post? Years of training told him to stand still, but something was wrong. Just then, the man pulled something from his bag. It happened so fast, James didn't think, he acted. Breaking all rules about standing still, he rushed forward toward the man. "Stop! Put that down!" James shouted. People screamed. Security officers ran forward. The man looked shocked and dropped what he was holding. It was not a weapon. It was a small present wrapped in paper. "I just wanted to give this to the Prime Minister," the man explained, looking scared. "It's a book from my village. I wrote a note inside." Security officers surrounded the man quickly. They checked his bag and the package. Everything was safe. There was no danger. The man was telling the truth. Captain Reynolds arrived at the scene. James stood straight, waiting to be punished for breaking position without orders. "I'm sorry, sir," James said. "I thought he might be dangerous." The captain looked at James for a long moment. Then he did something surprising. He put his hand on James's shoulder. "You did exactly right, Porter," he said. "You saw something that worried you, and you acted to protect everyone. That's what being a guard is truly about." Later that day, the palace security chief called James to his office. James was sure he was in trouble now, but the security chief shook his hand. "What you did today is what we need," he said. "The Royal Guard isn't just for show. Your quick action showed everyone that you take your real duty seriously." That evening, the news talked about the alert Royal Guard who had stopped a possible threat. They didn't mention that the man was innocent, only bringing a gift. They didn't know his name was James Porter, but that didn't matter to James. Back at the guardhouse, the other guards treated him like a hero. Thomas brought him tea. Michael patted his back. Even William, the oldest guard, nodded with respect. "My first week as a guard," William told him, "I almost grabbed a woman who was reaching into her coat near the Queen. Turned out she was just getting a handkerchief. I felt foolish, but my captain said the same thing yours did. Better safe than sorry." James nodded, understanding now more than ever. The perfect uniforms, the standing still, the careful marching. These were important traditions. But the heart of the Royal Guard was something deeper. It was about being ready to act when needed, about putting safety before ceremony when it really mattered. That night, James called his mother. "I saw you on the news," she said proudly. "They didn't say your name, but I knew it was you." "I was just doing my job," James said, echoing the words his grandfather had always used. "Exactly," his mother replied. "That's what makes you a true Royal Guard." 2 years had passed since James joined the Royal Guard. Summer had returned to the palace. The gardens were full of bright flowers, and tourists filled the grounds each day. One morning, Captain Reynolds called James to his office. This was unusual. James wondered if he had done something wrong. "Porter," Captain Reynolds said when James entered, "next week is the Queen's birthday parade. It's the biggest event of the year." James nodded. Every guard knew about the birthday parade. Thousands of people would line the streets. Millions more would watch on television. "I want you to be front guard for the Queen's carriage," Captain Reynolds continued. James felt his mouth drop open. Front guard was the most visible position in the entire parade. That guard would be seen by everyone. This honor was usually given to guards with many years of service. "But sir," James said, "I've only been here 2 years." Captain Reynolds smiled. "You've earned it, Porter. You understand what being a guard really means." That night, James could not sleep. He kept thinking about the huge responsibility. What if he made a mistake? What if he tripped during the march? What if his horse got scared in the crowds? The next morning, James went to the practice yard. For hours, he practiced his marching. He practiced sitting on his horse. He practiced the exact movements he would need during the parade. Thomas found him there late in the afternoon. "You're working too hard," he said. "You'll be fine." "I can't make mistakes," James said. "Not in this position." Thomas sat next to him on a bench. "Do you know why the captain chose you?" "No," James admitted. "Because you care," Thomas said simply. "You care about doing things right." The days passed quickly. Soon it was the night before the parade. James sat on his bed, polishing his boots and buttons until they shone. His special parade uniform hung ready. There was a knock at the door. It was William, the oldest guard. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "Please," James said, moving his polishing cloths aside. William sat down. In his hands, he held something wrapped in cloth. Slowly, he unwrapped it. Inside was a beautiful silver pocket watch. "This was given to me on my first birthday parade," William explained. "It has been passed down to special guards for over 100 years. James stared at the watch. It was old but perfectly kept. On the back were the initials of every guard who had carried it during a birthday parade. "Tomorrow, you'll carry this," William said, placing it in James's hand. "Add your initials after the parade." James felt the weight of the watch in his palm. It was more than just metal. It was history. It was trust. It was tradition. "I don't know what to say," James whispered. "Just do us proud," William said, standing to leave. "That's all." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for a parade. James dressed carefully in his special red parade uniform with extra gold trim. He placed the silver watch in his pocket, feeling its weight against his chest. At the stables, he met his horse, a beautiful black animal named Thunder. As James checked the saddle, he saw Captain Reynolds watching. "My grandfather rode in the birthday parade," James told him. "He told me stories about it when I was small." The captain nodded. "And now you're part of that story." As the parade time grew near, James mounted Thunder. His heart beat fast, but his hands were steady. Around him, other guards prepared their horses. The royal carriages waited nearby, shining in the sun. "Remember," Captain Reynolds said to all the guards, "today we show the world what the Royal Guard stands for: tradition, discipline, honor." James straightened his back. He thought about his grandfather. He thought about William and the watch in his pocket. He thought about all the guards who had done this before him, year after year, decade after decade. The weight of tradition felt heavy on his shoulders. But it wasn't a burden. It was strength. It connected him to something greater than himself. As the palace gates opened and the parade began, James moved forward on Thunder. Thousands of people cheered. Cameras flashed. But James focused only on his duty, on being worthy of the trust placed in him. He was no longer just James Porter. Today, he was the Royal Guard, keeper of tradition, protector of history, symbol of something that would continue long after he was gone. And for the first time, he truly understood the weight and the honor of that role. 2.5 years had passed since James joined the Royal Guard. Autumn had come to the palace, turning the trees golden and red. The air was cool, and leaves crunched under the feet of tourists. James had new duties now. He was chosen to be part of the royal tour, traveling with the Queen to 5 cities in 1 week. This was a big honor for a guard with less than 3 years of service. "Pack carefully," Thomas advised him the night before the tour. "You need to look perfect in every city." The first days of the tour went smoothly. In each city, crowds lined the streets to see the Queen. The Royal Guard marched perfectly, looking smart in their red uniforms. Newspapers took many pictures of them. By the 4th day, everyone was tired. The Queen had visited hospitals, schools, and government buildings. The guards had stood for hours each day, marched in 4 parades, and slept in different hotels each night. In the 4th city, it rained all day. The guards' uniforms got wet. Their tall black hats became heavy with water, but they stood straight, and did not complain. That evening, as they prepared to leave for the last city, James saw something that caught his eye. An old man stood behind the barriers in the rain. He held an old, wet photograph in a plastic cover. He looked sad when the Queen's car drove away. James walked over to the man. This was not part of his duty, but something told him to go. "Sir," James said politely, "are you all right?" The old man looked up with surprise. "I just wanted Her Majesty to see this," he said, showing James the photograph. It showed a young guard from many years ago, standing next to a younger version of the Queen. "That's me," the old man explained. "I was a royal guard from 1952 to 1970. I was there on her first day as Queen." James looked at the picture with new interest. The young guard in the photo stood tall and proud, just like James did now. "What's your name, sir?" James asked. "Henry Wilson," the old man replied. "Wait here, please, Mr. Wilson," James said. He walked quickly to where Captain Reynolds stood by the cars. "Sir," James said, "there's an old guard outside. He served when the Queen first took the throne. He has a photograph he wanted her to see." Captain Reynolds looked at his watch. They were behind schedule already. "We need to leave in 5 minutes," he said. "Please, sir," James said. This would mean so much to him. The captain thought for a moment, then nodded. 2 minutes, Porter. That's all I can give you." James hurried back to Mr. Wilson and brought him to the waiting area. He spoke quickly to the Queen's assistant, who went inside to speak to the Queen. To everyone's surprise, the Queen herself came out. When she saw Mr. Wilson, her face broke into a warm smile. "Your Majesty," Mr. Wilson said, his voice shaking. "You won't remember me, but Henry Wilson," the Queen said, surprising everyone. "Of course I remember. You were on duty the day I returned from Africa and learned I had become Queen." Tears filled Mr. Wilson's eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty. That's right." The Queen looked at the old photograph. "May I?" she asked, taking it carefully. "It would be my honor if you kept it," Mr. Wilson said. The Queen thanked him and spoke with him for a few more minutes. Though they were now running late, she did not rush the conversation. When she finally returned to her car, she was still holding the photograph. Captain Reynolds came to stand beside James. "We're now 20 minutes behind schedule," he said, but he wasn't angry. "Good call, Porter." Later that night, in the new hotel, Thomas asked James, "Why did you stop for that old man?" "It wasn't part of our duty." James thought about it. "Being a guard isn't just about marching and standing still," he said. "It's about knowing when the human things matter more than the schedule." The next morning, a small note was delivered to James. It was from the Queen herself. "Thank you for remembering that behind every tradition lies a human heart. The photograph you helped recover is now one of my treasured possessions." James carefully folded the note and put it in his pocket next to the silver watch. Both were reminders that the real duty of a royal guard went far beyond the red uniform and tall black hat. The true heart of tradition was the human touch. 3 years had passed since James first stood at the palace gates as a new royal guard. Summer had returned again, bringing warm days and blue skies to the palace grounds. Much had changed in those 3 years. James was no longer a nervous new guard. Now he helped train the new recruits who arrived each month with wide eyes and stiff backs. On this bright morning, Captain Reynolds called James to his office. The captain's hair had more gray now, but his eyes were still sharp and clear. "Porter," he said when James entered, "I'm making you a training sergeant. You'll be in charge of the new recruits." James stood straighter. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored." The captain nodded. "You understand what the Royal Guard is really about. That's what I need in a training sergeant." Later that day, James met his first group of new recruits. 20 young men and women stood in a perfect line, just as James had done 3 years before. Their uniforms were new. Their faces showed excitement and fear. "Welcome to the Royal Guard," James said, walking slowly in front of them. You are now part of a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. He studied their faces. Some looked nervous. Others tried to look brave. All of them reminded him of himself on his first day. Look at the palace, James told them, pointing to the grand building behind them. What do you see? A young woman spoke up. History, sir. Yes, James nodded. What else? A tall young man answered. Tradition, sir. Good, James said. What else? The recruits looked confused. They didn't know what other answer he wanted. James smiled slightly. You're all right. The Royal Guard is about history. It's about tradition. But there's something more important. He paused. The Royal Guard is about people. He told them about his grandfather saving paintings during a storm. He told them about William and the silver watch. He told them about Mr. Wilson, the old guard who had kept a photograph for 50 years. Behind these walls are people, James explained. Behind our ceremonies are people. And you yourselves are not just guards. You are people. Never forget that. That afternoon, as the new recruits practiced their marching, Captain Reynolds came to watch. He stood beside James, both of them watching the young guards learn their steps. You're doing well with them, the captain said. I'm trying to teach them what took me 3 years to learn, James replied. The captain smiled. Some lessons can only come with time. As they talked, James noticed a familiar figure walking in the palace garden. The Queen. She saw them and came toward them. Your Majesty, both men said, standing at attention. At ease, the Queen said with a smile. She looked at the new recruits practicing nearby. New guards, Sergeant Porter. Yes, Your Majesty, James replied, still surprised whenever the Queen remembered his name. What are you teaching them today? She asked. About the heart behind the tradition, Your Majesty, James said. The Queen nodded with understanding. The best lesson of all. She watched the recruits for a moment. Your grandfather would be very proud of you, Porter. After the Queen left, James continued watching the new recruits. One young woman was struggling with her steps. James went to help her, showing her the right way to turn and march. I'm sorry, sir, she said. I want to get it right. You will, James assured her. Remember why we do this. Not just for the perfect steps, but for what they represent. That evening, James walked through the palace grounds alone. The sun was setting, painting the old stone walls with golden light. Tourists were gone for the day. The palace was quiet. He stopped at the spot where he had first stood guard 3 years ago. So much had changed since then. He had grown from a nervous recruit into a training sergeant. He had learned what it truly meant to be a royal guard. James touched the silver watch in his pocket. He thought about all the guards who had stood in this spot before him. He thought about all the new guards who would stand here in the future. The Royal Guard was like the palace itself, built of tradition and history, standing strong through the years. But its true strength came from the people who served, the beating hearts beneath the red uniforms. As the palace lights came on against the darkening sky, James Porter understood his place in that long, proud line of service. He was not just keeping a tradition. He was keeping it alive.